couple people who who I would have liked to have been here aren't able to be here today. Ryan and I think a couple other people said they weren't going to be able to be here, but what I really want to do, kind of more than anything, is kind of get everyone together and kind of share with, well, first of all, kind of hear from folks, both people who aren't on the committee, who have some thoughts and ideas and want to weigh in, but then also people who are on the subcommittee, kind of what hopes, desires, et cetera are. And then kind of, I want to talk a little bit about what at least I'd like to try to tackle, try to address, and kind of how, at least in my mind, I'm thinking about getting my mind around it and moving the ball forward, and just have a discussion, hopefully keep it to about an hour, and then talk about process and kind of a good time for people to meet in the future, et cetera.
Sounds good.
And Wally, if it makes you feel any better, my eyesight's going, so I had to basically ask the city, because I can't read it on the computer screen, and if I print it out on 8.5 by 11, I can't read all the fine print, so I have these made, so I can have my song sheet in a way I can read it, and also to be able to scribble on, et cetera, kind of as we roll forward.
If you have a way to have a duplicate of that made, I'll pay for it. I'd love to have it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're anything like me, I kind of am old school with maps and stuff. And I'll talk with Ashley and folks of the city and see what we can do.
Well, I'm happy to pay for it. It's not part. I mean, this is, you know, we're all doing this to try to make it better. But when I incur an extra cost, I'm perfectly happy to pay for an extra cost. And I'd love a copy of that, because it lets me look at what possibilities I see just as an independent. I'm an old developer. I was a commercial developer all my life.
Well, and yeah, and kind of to that end, let me have a discussion with the city. I know that that RCDC, which I'm on, committed some money towards this effort, and particularly those of us who are volunteering our time, but also you being a property owner and a commercial business owner there. I'd like to figure out a way, since it's not a major expense, to get you a copy, and other people may want copies of that too. It helps me out tremendously, just because I can't printing it out on 8 by 8.5 by 11 letter size isn't working for me.
It doesn't do it.
No, and not also on the level of analysis that I want to go into on this effort. And I know, kind of as a committee, I would be willing to venture that most of the people here are going to want to get into as well.
I will like to reveal that Tom Farrell and I had pretty severe, long way discussions into possibilities for increasing the retail sales and therefore the revenue to the city sales tax. Among the things we discussed had to do with channelizing, I call it Eanes Creek. I guess it's also Dry Creek. If you channelized it, the city's 4 acres, my property, because I own a big chunk of the Eanes Creek water bed, the flow bed.
Right.
And if we could channelize it, which would be a major expense, but you'll pick up a lot of parking that way. You'll pick up some land to be used, the city land, which is really not that usable because it's really the bed of the creek. That becomes usable land. You got a lot of pluses by doing it. I'm not opposed to development. I don't think the development is going to occur. And back in, I guess, 98 to 2000, when there was some real activity with Westlake Hills going along with the state on widening and putting a third lane in,
Mhm.
I was involved with getting a petition out. I got 1,700 signatures on Bee Caves Road of commercial owners and or business people in favor of the widening and putting in the turn lane. And the city council at that time was in favor of it. And I can't remember the name of the city manager, but I got a file that's about yay thick. We had the city attorney involved, my attorney involved, and we reached an agreement that I was going to dedicate the property to get the widening going, and the city and I were going to work together. I was going to put in a retention pond that the state wanted as part of Eanes Creek property I own. That was really pretty well done. And I guess between the city and TxDOT, it fell in a deep, dark hole, never to be seen again.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think, that's one thing, Wally, that I know, in discussions with Tom and discussions with a bunch of the city council members, looking forward, looking to our crystal ball going forward. That's one of the things that we are going to be talking in the near future with TxDOT about having to revisit is, really that stretch of Bee Caves, really from there at Rollingwood Drive, Old Walsh, Charlton, from there, I guess, to kind of down around the finish line.
Yeah, between my property and the finish line.
Well, and also, kind of what you also point out goes into, things on that roadway, such as improving the, building a bridge, improving the stormwater flows, et cetera. The thing I will say about, channelization is, anytime you're talking about channelization of, right there, kind of just adjacent to you, where it's really kind of a what I'd almost call kind of a LA style arroyo. It's not really a natural stream bed anymore. I think there's some ways to potentially improve that in terms of flow, everything else. Anything downstream from there that's natural stream bed, we would need to both work with the Army Corps of Engineers on 404 permitting, probably an individual permit process. Plus, we'd also have to work with FEMA, if we're looking at trying to regain property, particularly that piece of property down that the city owns that's in the floodplain currently, in order to do a CLOMER condition or a LOMER letter map revision on the floodplain maps in order to make that at any time developable. And you're talking about a pretty arduous for channelization process, and something that downstream you have City of Austin, and they would they have definite strong feelings about stormwater and everything else. I think there's potentially some things that maybe not as a part of this. I mean, maybe as a part of this. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on it and kind of save some people some brain damage, because this is kind of my bailiwick in my line of work. Is I think there's some things we could do in terms of, not necessarily channelization, but some restoration, natural stream water design to kind of create some eddies, some pools, some holding ponds, and slow down velocity downstream, get some additional uplift in terms of water quality, but also help with some of the flood issues throughout the system. It'd still be a pretty big undertaking, but something that I think, as a city, we'd be a little bit prouder of, because it'd have a little bit more of a natural look. City of Austin would probably be a little bit happier of it too. That and one of my big deals is I want to talk about some invasive species, particularly plant species control, et cetera. But that's kind of something that I'm not going to try to waste too much of our time on, because it's kind of the stuff I geek out on. But is not necessarily going to be the best use of this committee's time. So if we want to get rolling, Ashley, if we're not already, we might as well get rolling.
Sure. Yeah, we're recording, so y'all can go ahead.
Okay, good. So basically to kick things off, first of all, is there anyone, and I see Wendi Hundley on here. Thank you for being on here with us, Wendi. I want to see if you want to say anything kind of as we get started, and if there's anyone else who's maybe not on the committee who wants to kind of say anything before we get rolling.
No, thank you, David. I'm just here to listen and be a resource if you need me for anything, but I appreciate all the work y'all are doing. So I'm just hanging out listening. Awesome.
No, thank you for doing that. And so kind of getting rolling on this, you know, on a regular agenda, we have, let's do roll call first. So I'm not getting too far ahead of myself, Ashley. I don't necessarily have do you have a list of who's kind of officially on the subcommittee?
I don't have that handy. We can just call roll for all of the strike force members that are here if you'd like.
Yeah, that is perfect.
Okay, I'll go ahead and go down the line. Brooke Brown.
Here?
Meredith Knight.
Here.
Mo Goyle.
Here.
David Smith.
Here.
Wallace Grainer.
Here.
Drew Flahive.
Here.
And Jeff Green.
Here.
Outstanding. Thank y'all all for being here. And I already asked for, I kind of put things a little bit ahead of the cart, ahead of the horse here, but I'll ask a second call for any public comments kind of as we're getting rolling. Okay, hearing none, we'll start into the regular agenda. Picking up with number 2, discussion regarding the parameters of the Bee Caves Road subcommittee. And I have it broken into kind of 2 major kind of headings, 2 major issues to look at, and actually 2, really 3. The first being, you know, quite simply land use. And I think, unless I hear any objections from y'all, I think the best way to tackle this is probably going to be literally on a property by property basis, going through and analyzing, okay, you know, really taking a look at what's the as-built, what's built right now, starting with that as a baseline. And then one of the things that I'm working on, Tom and I have been working on, and it's not quite ready for prime time, but kind of once we get a little bit better draft, I want to circulate it. But we're kind of creating a matrix that could be used for really every single commercial property along Bee Caves Road that's part of this. And really kind of the items on the matrix are right now, and this is draft, but kind of, you know, taking a look at each property and asking the following questions. 1, what's the impact on neighbors? You know, slash community values. 2, what's the visibility impacts to neighbors? 3, what's the visibility from Bee Caves Road? 4, what's the usefulness to the city? And that is, usefulness has, in my mind, part A and a point, part B. Part A is what's the usefulness in terms of tax benefit, both ad valorem and potential sales tax. And part B is there a business there now that we would frequent? Is there a restaurant we would go to? Is there a office someone in our neighborhood would want to either work at or go there for professional services? Number 5, what's the market, the current uses? Number 6, what's the access issues with Bee Caves Road? Are there any barriers with regard to access. Um, uh, let's see, the next one, I've lost count already. The next one is cross access, which kind of ties in with access. And then what's the current use, like we talked about. And really kind of go through each one and kind of look at each one individually. And I predict if we look at each one individually, we're then going to be able to come back and kind of group them together, kind of in general kind of districts. And I've already kind of started doing a little bit of it in my mind, but I thought if basically we came up with kind of a evaluation matrix for each property, it would at least allow us to have as a group a common set of really common set of criteria that we're using to evaluate each property to frame and help our discussions on. Does that make sense to you all? Okay, so what I'm hoping to do is this week get that matrix kind of finalized between Tom and I, and then distributing it to the group and get y'all's input on whether it hits the mark, whether there's something on there that you don't think makes sense, or whether there's something else we need to put on there. But really what we're taking a look at, and the way I try to take a look at it is, okay, if I'm, kind of, look at it where, because we have to look at it, and while I think this is where you add value, I think we have to look at these properties both, from a community standpoint, but also through the lens of reality based on market conditions, et cetera. Because, I think the reality is there's some properties that might be, pretty, a pretty good bet to maybe be redeveloped in the near term. And I include near term as 10 years out. And there's some because of economics, and between economics, basis, current land use constraints, et cetera, that may not get redeveloped for 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, that's just the nature of it. And so the question is, looking 30 years in the future, when and if someone comes along and wants to redevelop, how can we help try to encourage the type of redevelopment that we would like to see, and help, frankly, avoid the kind of redevelopment scenario we don't want to see. So that's kind of land use. The next thing is a group I think we should tackle is a mobility issue, just there along bee caves. And I have mobility broken up into 3 categories. One, automobile and vehicle. And this gets a lot into basically vehicular access to and along Bee Caves Road to our commercial core and business district, and how to ensure that. And frankly, as much as how to ensure it, how to help dissuade it from becoming a high-speed flyby zone that commuters just zip by day in, day out, and how to help it, have more of a, kind of a smaller community business, retail restaurant feel, as opposed to a state highway feel. So vehicular traffic, bike mobility and access, and pedestrian mobility and access. Because I think, it's one thing to stop and, be going along Bee Caves Road, either, resident of Rollingwood, or someone either coming from City of Austin or coming from Westlake Hills or further out, and stopping along Bee Caves Road in your car at Trader Joe's or at Chinatown or wherever. And then there's also, okay, well, if they stop, how do we maybe encourage them once they park, to walk somewhere? Or how do we make it easier for people in our neighborhood to Rollingwood residents to bike and, go grab a bite of dinner or, a cup of coffee or breakfast taco or whatever. So that's number 2, mobility. And then 3, as a part of that, and Wally, this kind of gets into and dovetails with what you're talking about, is also take a look at water quality issues, because I think there's some real opportunities through redevelopment to help improve water quality and also flooding issues from the bee cave side of the equation. And it's like what you talked about, Wally, and you alluded to it. Anything that is a historic type development that's been there for a while along Bee Caves Road, and certainly we have, a lot of development there has been there for a while. It's going to have to, if it's going to be redeveloped, going to have to comply with the TCEQ Edwards rules, which is going to require on-site water quality and water quality capability that is going to be better than it is currently. And there's a chance to also take a look at that and how to encourage that, and potentially do a little potentially bit of trade-off, because a lot of those properties are maxed out in terms of impervious cover, and how to do a little bit of trade-off in under a redevelopment scenario where you maybe allow a little bit more or pretty much current existing impervious cover as a trade-off for 2 things. 1, improve water quality controls, both water quality in terms of speed of runoff and also water quality of runoff. But then also trade a little bit of impervious cover from my way of thinking, trade a little bit of impervious cover and allow like an existing development to redevelop to pretty close to the existing impervious cover in exchange for, not building as high and not having as much of an impact on neighboring residential properties, and also taking a look at, some things we could do through, and this is kind of where I geek out a little bit, some things we do through some invasive species control in terms of vegetation, but also possibly some restoration, some plantings using native and adaptive species to create a kind of more of a separation and more of delineation between kind of the commercial district and the residential district. So those are kind of the 3 areas for us to focus on, at least in my mind now, although I am open to other things we should need to look at, or if there's anything I failed to mention in kind of those 3 things that people want to add to, let me know. Does that make sense, or am I
That
just
sounds
kind
good
of
to me.
going crazy talking?
Comprehensive.
A lot of choices.
Yeah.
Almost too many.
Well, and that's, and while you're right, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of treading, particularly on land use, trying to create this matrix. So at least we're all taking a look at the same set of criteria kind of on a property by property basis, because I think the way it's going to tease out is, and yeah, it's kind of daunting in it. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work looking at things on property by property basis, but I started looking at it's really not that many. And then kind of as you go through there's a lot of similarly situated properties that you start kind of batching, and you say, well, this one's like this one's like this one's like this. And so we can kind of in time kind of group these together. But I think it's going to be kind of important to kind of give a little bit of TLC and a little bit of attention to each one, at least on the front end, because there's going to be some, there's going to be some groupings where we kind of view them together, but there's going to be some minor slight differences in different as-built characteristics of some of these properties. whether it's existing height or existing impervious cover versus others.
Let me point out something so you know where I'm coming from. I took the occasion twice in about the last 15 years to walk Eanes Creek from approximately where the new buildings are,
Mm-hmm.
the Del Amo track.
Mm-hmm.
I've walked it all the way up as far as I could to Bee Caves Road, where it crosses under Bee Caves, and I found it impossible to walk that area because the state will not keep that clean and allow a flow of water. They've created a real problem in there themselves. They're very willing to point fingers every direction but at themselves. If you start at Edge Grove and come towards the Palisades, you're going to find that the reason they've got double parking in front of those buildings is because they go right up to the creek.
Yeah.
So you haven't got that much usable soil there when you figure out those buildings, their depth, and the double acting parking in front. That's what they have. And they're one story. And that starts at Edge Grove with the gas station, then the old Mr. Gaddy's, then the jewelry resale, then the next one that has the Goodwill store.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got the Goodyear store, you've got the Quick Lube, you've got the car wash, and you've got the Palisades. It's going to be pretty difficult to do an awful lot in there, considering the amount of surface area that's buildable, and considering that you want to limit the stories. By the way, just because I'll tell people about myself, I've been a commercial developer since 1957, so I'm an old duck. I've never seen I shouldn't say I never. I've rarely seen successful combinations of first-story retail with office above or condo above, unless you're in New York City, Chicago, downtown LA, and we're none of the three. So building what just blew my mind was what the Pegasus plan, and they came up with 2 stories above commercial and all of that. I don't know who was smoking what, but somebody better look at reality, because that is probably one of the guaranteed failures you could put on Bee Caves Road. Well, to me, it's just somebody's going to throw their money away if they try it, because it's proven to be very rarely successful where there are not high-rise buildings.
Well, and Wally, I'll echo that. And, it's, I have a lot of clients, a lot of friends that are in the real estate development business in and around town. And universally, I'll agree with you, is really the only area I've ever seen first floor retail with either office or residential above really work is in areas where you have and are able to create density. And I mean, and there's some exceptions in urban environments where you have kind of districts, and like, kind of one that comes to mind is like the when you look at like a Highland Park Village in Dallas, for instance, where you basically have 2-story retail. However, it is a very, very dense setting, and it is a setting where it is a destination center, and also pretty much all of the 2-story retail that is there is all accessed by first-floor entrance, and then you have 2-story interiors. And because of the nature of Bee Caves Road, because of the travel on Bee Caves Road, and also because of community values and everything else, I don't see a scenario where, for a lot of the properties, and we go by property, where basically we can create the density to make that make sense. And a lot of those properties also are properties that have been developed for a long time. You're going to have issues with regard to, frankly, being able to park, creating bigger buildings given the available, the developable square footage of a lot of those. So I think, and also a lot of those are properties that have been owned for a long time. You know, they always seem to have tenants in them. And they, you know, I'd be willing to bet the people that own a lot of those properties either have, you know, no or very low basis in them. So, you know, it's, if you have, I mean, it's kind of real estate 101. I mean, if you don't owe anything on a property and it's cash flowing and it's occupied, and you can't go up and you can't go bigger, you know, what are you going to do? So, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Well, I think some of the individual properties, you know, they kind of are what they are. And, you know, I think, you know, I don't have a problem, you know, with saying, okay, well, under a current zoning code, you can do 2 stories, you do 30 feet. But, you know, a lot of those properties, I don't see it ever being much more than you know, a single story play, unless something really changes in the market that we don't know and we don't necessarily foresee. I think there's some other properties, frankly, where we can allow some other things and be a little more creative, that I've been looking at and thinking about. But you know, I'll kind of, you know, talk more about those at that time. I mean, and you know, the whole idea of, you know, either office or residential over retail is intriguing, but it really only works when if you can A, park it, and B, create, you know, enough density where people are able to park and then walk, and you have more mobility via foot traffic. And right now, the way it is laid out and the way it's going to be laid out for the future is you just, you know, just don't lend itself real well to parking in one place and then walking, frankly.
I couldn't agree more.
Does anyone else have any thoughts or anything they want particularly make sure we talk about as a group, look at as a group?
This is Brooke. I agree with the approach you're taking, David. And it seems to me, if I look at Bee Caves Road from a residential, you know, what do I, as a person who lives in Rollingwood, want to see on Bee Caves Road? That's one point of view. And then the other point of view is from a commercial, someone who would own these commercial properties and attempt to attract tenants and or businesses.
Right.
And we really don't, I don't think the concept, what seems to drive this for me is that we can encourage the kinds of development that provide something back to Rollingwood. Mm-hmm. There's just not enough commercial property to make this something that will take care of Rollingwood's budget problems for forever. You know, there's just not enough commercial property there, and there's not enough ability to do the parking that would be needed to do that. But we can enhance it for the benefit of Rollingwood and for the benefit of the greater community, I think, and certainly having a plan toward that effect will help that happen. You know, right now, Bee Caves, the Bee Creek is an eyesore. Frankly, it's just an eyesore. If we can find a way to turn that into something less of an eyesore and more amenable to quality restaurant and retail and other services, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I'm glad you mentioned. That's one of the things I really like to look at. That's kind of where I'm going, you know, in terms of, and it's kind of a holistic approach of doing some things to improve water quality and everything back there, do some invasive species type removal, but then, some opportunities to help. And I think, Wally, I think you'd agree with this, to make it more attractive. One of the other things I kind of want to visit with you a little bit about, you guys a little bit about, and also, Wendy, this may be something you want to jump into a little bit, is I know we've had some issues, particularly when you look at the south side of Bee Caves Road, with a lot of the plantings that were done and things like that, and landscaping, particularly on that big tall retaining wall and everything else. I'd like to get a little bit of a better understanding of, my understanding is, TxDOT built it, TxDOT did the initial plantings, but then kind of said, well, beyond the initial plantings, y'all are responsible for keeping them alive and maintaining that. And I think, that's one thing, particularly on that side of the road, I think could, improve the attractiveness of some of those properties, is by paying attention to that. But also as we look at some things there, and I think, Brooke, you're absolutely 100% right. I mean, I think there's some things we can do, talk about doing, think about doing to really improve the aesthetic of Bee Creek / Eames Creek / Dry Creek, because I think it could look a whole heck of a lot better. And also, I think, one of the things like I want to talk about in terms of, in terms of taking a look at land uses, is taking a look at things like, setbacks for commercial properties, because I think there is some benefit, and you have to pay attention to parking, you have to pay attention to all that, but in pulling the businesses towards Bee Caves Road, in exchange for some cooperation, doing some things on the backside of the property, primarily doing some restoration work, doing some invasive species control work, and doing some native and adapted vegetative plantings back there that'll help delineate the different districts and make it look a little more attractive, frankly.
Mhm.
David, I do know that for the wall on Bee Cave, since it's the TxDOT state highway system, and it's part of the state highway system. When we've had crumbling wall features happen over there,
Yeah.
we've had to contact them and have them fix it. So they are supposed to be maintaining it, but they haven't. And there's not really any authority that our city has to maintain that, nor do we get any budget from TxDOT to maintain it. So that's
Right. And I know that's the case for hardscapes. Is that the case for plantings as well?
yeah. So it's for hardscapes and planting and trimming it back. I mean, I've walked it with my kids, and basically you almost have to go out into the traffic to get around
Oh, yeah.
some of those plantings, but we don't have any budget coming from them to maintain it, and we have a small city staff, and so
Oh, yeah.
taking that on when they're supposed to be maintaining it is just a hard thing for our city to be able to accommodate.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that.
The first thing you'd
And
have
I'm
to
not,
do
I'm not
there,
looking to add any resource expenditures for the city.
the first thing you'd have to do there to do much in beautification is get water.
Yep.
If anything you plant there is going to require water all summer long, or it's going to die. And I can't believe that the state put that in without provision for watering for terraces. It's almost by definition a stupid thing. You do terraces, you got to supply water to food the plants to make the terraces look decent.
So it seems like right now there's not much incentive or desire of businesses to do anything new along bee caves like that. You know, I mean, the business is only going to do what's in the best interest of the business for the most part.
Right.
You know, like when that Mr. Gaddy's went out of business, I heard people saying, "Oh man, that's a great spot to tear it down and put something, you know, more beneficial up." But you know, a business is most, you know, if they can make do with the existing space, they're going to make do with the existing space.
Right.
And I know one thing that wasn't that one idea that I think would help would if we, I think Rolling would have to pay some, if not all of it, but getting a sidewalk. I know that the sidewalk that they put on Westlake along Bee Caves, I mean, I've used it, my kids have used it, gets a ton of use to get to Westwood and go all the way down to 360 practically. And maybe it was dangerous, but just as a sample, once I did walk Bee Caves from Edge Grove to Rollingwood. And yeah, there's parts where, you know,
Oh yeah.
traffic's going to hit you basically. I think that would be, so in my opinion, that would be a big improvement to the communities to have at least a sidewalk on one side.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think
think
that's
you'll-
one thing about the design along the new area also is at least having that little bit of green space
Mhm.
in between the roadway and the sidewalk helps. You know, but kind of going back to the point, you know, some of the properties on the north, you kind of get, you know, gets a little bit narrow, and you know, some of the properties on the south, you know, have that retaining wall there that kind of creates some challenges. And you know, that's why, you know, I still kind of want to take a look at, you know, ways to, you know, basically create, take a look at potentially creating something on the backside of some of the properties, you know, and it may not be, it may be more of kind of a sidewalk really than it is a, you know, kind of a trail or anything else. But, you know, something that would kind of parallel Eames Creek that would give, you know, a little more incentive for both, you know, for people to pay attention to it, beautify it, et cetera, because you could give some of those businesses kind of, you know, potentially two front doors, as opposed to what the way it's kind of treated now is kind of like, you know, having a front side and then an alleyway. And, you know, but I mean, you know, we'd have to do that, you know, in such a way that it would, you know, be safe, make sense for adjoining residential property owners. I think you'd have to, you know, do so in a way that, you know, is going to be protective of and kind of, you know, help delineate the difference between commercial and residential, and you know, worry about kind of drift.
Mhm. Well, this is Brooke. One of the other things that has kind of intrigued me when I was first looking at the Pegasus study, I then went to see whether there was data for sales tax by type of retail, and found a number of studies, mostly done by either the National Retailers Association or similar retail organizations. And the sales tax by type of retail varies enormously.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Tiffany's is the highest sales tax per square foot. Next is, guess, Lululemon.
Mm-hmm.
And then it, you know, Lululemon is like $1,000 per square foot, their average per store, which is huge compared to most other retail operations. And so as I was thinking about, you know, what could this part of BK's Road look like, I think we could, especially with the state that Barton Creek is in, if we can make it pretty and attract that kind of retail next to a nice restaurant, it would, you know, that would be a good thing.
And I agree 100% with you.
Something like the kind of development along 35th, the little picket fences. There's a gardening store, kind of high-end gardening store, and then some very high-end retail right next to it. But lots of people go to little picket fence, or it's picket fence or little picket fence, I've forgotten.
You got Little Dogwoods, the restaurant there?
Little Dogwood?
Little Boxwoods, Little Boxwoods?
Little Boxwoods, yes, Little Boxwoods. Yeah,
Tiny Boxwood.
Tiny Boxwood.
Boxwood, yeah. But
We're close. We're around it.
but that, that it didn't take a lot of property. The parking is to the interior as opposed to along the road. It encourages people to stay because there's a mix of things you can do there. I think we could do some of, or try to encourage some of that.
And I've always thought that's a good parallel, Brooke, in terms of, because it's a similar, you have 35th, 38th Street there, which is, pretty heavily traveled traffic through there. The tiny box was kind of off of side street, but then they've kind of created a little cluster of it. The one thing that I will tell you that site has going for it, and having lived in Bracker Woods before I moved to Rollingwood, is you do have a good amount actually of foot traffic and accessibility from the neighborhood side to be able to walk to those places. And that's the sort of thing that I want us to be able to discuss about, particularly when you look at some of the properties along the north side, is, how to improve that feel where people can access it via, car from the front side, but then we make it a little bit more both attractive, but also accessible on the backside from a, from a bike and pedestrian standpoint. But one of the barriers we're still going to have, is, as much as I would love, my pipe dream is this, my pipe dream is, and I'm just choosing this as a random example. I don't have anything against the Goodyear, but I'd love for that Goodyear to be a Prada flagship store.
Oh, okay.
But the thing about it is those types of stores want to be an area closer to other types of high-end flagship stores.
This is where we should have.
Where you have some density and where you have, people, and that's why I kind of go back to, the Highland Park Village model, which, doesn't really work, because we really don't have a piece of property that would lend itself to the combination of that level of density plus, being able to park and circulate, unless you look at, and it's, outside the city limits, actually the footprint of Highland Park Village fits on about 2/3 of Westwood's in terms of property. But the, I'll tell you the gross sales tax, I think I looked at the gross sales tax numbers for Highland Park Village in the Park Cities in Dallas, and I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 500 or 600 million a year. Gross sales tax, and it's just unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, but you're thinking about things the right way, because it's like, if someone's looking to redevelop, particularly some of the smaller, kind of the smaller, more challenging properties that I think Wally, we know which ones we're talking about on the Bee Cave side. You're going to kind of have to, think about, okay, if I'm a developer, what's my upside for basically, taking existing leases, letting them lapse or buying them out, going through a basically, replanning, re-permitting, and then, what am I going to build and who am I going to get in there that such that in terms of a tenant, such that I'm going to be able to realize my return on investment in a realistic time frame.
I think you're going to be very difficult to find a developer with the small lots that we have, as I'm speaking from Edge Grove, because the rest of it, I had no feeling what's going to happen there.
Well,
From Edge Grove up to my building, and then the two more buildings, which are basically just tucked right up against the bluff, have very little flat land, and then they go up 30, 50, 40 feet. To buy any one of those groups of stores there, starting from the Shell station going west, they're going to want a couple of $1 million for it, because to them it's worth that. Particularly if they're owned by families, which I believe they probably are. I don't know. I never ran title, but you're looking at expensive land.
Mhm.
You're gonna have to put together all of those together, at least up to me, including me, and then you got to figure out how to get the high dollar merchants in there. We
That's
do have the pot. We have the income level in our area with Westlake Hills and Rollingwood, but it's an uphill fight unless you got a developer like Endeavor or one of the other big commercial developers who says, I can bring in these stores that do $800 or $1,000 a square foot. They'll pay the kind of rent. I can tear down this building that's 45, 55, 60 years old. I'm paying a whale of money for the square foot of land it sits on. So you mean, to me, it's a giant mountain to climb. It's why I've not done any planning about doing anything with the Palisades, because today the Palisades is the highest and best use for that piece of ground. I've got a 100-foot green belt behind my property, which means that green belt was put in to protect the people down oh gee, my getting old. The big office buildings just built down at Mopac. There was a green belt put in there, and in that council meeting, that green belt was extended on the north side clear up to Rollingwood Drive.
Mhm.
There was no reason for it outside of there was concern that they couldn't do spot zoning of a green belt to protect just that area. So they nailed it on all of us that none of us were under development. A green belt was meaningless. The houses were there and the buildings were there. Nonetheless, that's what I have. Out of my 4.63 acres, and you take setbacks all off from it, front, sides, back, I have 1.7 acres developable, buildable. It just, I sit there and just kind of wait for somebody to decide they want to do something and buy up enough of the frontage to do a project where they've got the clients. They're big developers. They have the clients who say, if you build, give us a chance. And if you've been around it, doing your engineering type, that I kind of get the feeling you do, you know that exists. They just, the city probably almost has to have a search committee to try to find a developer that comes in and says, yes, I think this looks good. We want to come in and take a look at it. And I think that's probably where you're going to really end up doing your planning, is under a PUD.
Yeah, you'd still have to have, because of the size of some of those properties, you'd still have to have someone with you still have to have someone with the vision and the ability to buy up multiple parcels, but then you're still going to have, parking barriers and, everything else. And I mean,
it's not going to be easy. That's why Endeavor isn't doing it. It's why they bought the Del Amo tract, which was 12 acres, all contiguous.
Sure.
That was a lay down.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing, is that, there's definitely the wealth around Rollingwood and Westlake, but these people, including me, are happy to drive to the Domain or happy to drive to wherever else, the Lululemon on 6th Street. And with the way the properties are now, that the reality is these strip malls are out of fashion. And so, what can we realistically expect in terms of sort of redevelopment? Since it's unlikely with the amount of space available, how it's configured, and the fact that any modern development would demolish all of that, right? The Lululemon example, the tiny boxwood examples, those are all freestanding, right? Or part of small structures that are not the old school strip malls that most of the area Rollingwood has as far as existing retail.
Yeah.
So my mind kind of goes to what's, how do we find developers and retailers, et cetera, who would be interested in what's already existing? Or do we sort of aim higher, knowing the odds might be lower?
Although Mo, I'd say even the Lululemon on 6th Street is, that still is in there with, there used to be a kind of gift store there. There's an Amy's,
Yeah.
Waterloo Records, 24 Diner. You kind of have
the architecture of that square is not, we don't have architecture, commercial architecture like that. Or
that's right.
commercial, I don't mean art design, right? We just got sort of the, whether it's, where the Panera is, or where the Goodwill is, right? Like that same kind of thing could work where that strip where the Goodwill is and all that stuff. I mean, there's very little parking where that 24 Diner and Lululemon is, right? But they'd have to tear the whole thing down. They wouldn't just move into it, whoever was going to develop it.
Yeah, and they would probably have to take, and those, when you look at them, are pretty darn small lots, and they would probably have to take down more than one in order to get, the kind of traction to make something work.
But I think that's a great example, that Lulu, Waterloo, 24 Diner, Amy's, right? There's retail, there's food. It's a small spot of land. I'm a citizen volunteering on this. I struggle to see how that could translate, even though the land size is somewhat equivalent.
Yeah. I think all of this highlights, right, the real challenges we have at some of these great big ideas. And I think it's dangerous for us as committee members to try to project and play developer from this seat, because the real estate development business is really hard. And so there are plenty of people with money who would love to have a really successful center, right, in Rollingwood if it was feasible, right? My conclusion from that, I'm in the real estate business as well. I have office space on Bee Caves Road, is that it's really hard. And we have real constraints, right? We talked a lot about the geography. We talked about the existing zoning. So then I come back to, like, really, what is the purpose of this subcommittee here, right? Like, how do we help really just to move forward the plan, right? That's our goal. So how do we kind of help inform that decision rather than try to say, gosh, how do we make a new development? I don't mean to be totally negative, but I feel like we need to be a little bit negative and realistic about what we can do. And the thing that I then worry about, you make wholesale sweeping changes and you have unintended consequences, right? Because we can change policies, but it'll really be the developer taking risk who is going to make those decisions based on what we, may inform or help encourage the city council to do sometime in the future.
And Jeff, those are good points. But one of the things I think we as a group should do is take a look at things that are barriers to redevelopment, probably barriers to some sort of redevelopment we want to potentially see, and make sure that they're not barriers, artificial barriers going forward, because it's basically developers bear risk, but they're also attracted to certainty. And also, there's some things that we have that are pretty simple fixes where, I agree with you. We're not developers. We shouldn't act like developers, and we shouldn't try to, think through a development scenario, down to the nth degree. But,
well, are there simple fixes though? That's the one thing, right? It's like, we don't have a good pedestrian access. We don't have, those are big problems, and those are expensive. So we go from trying to create sources of revenue potentially to, like, now being a cost center to maybe allow redevelopment. I don't know. It's just like very quickly you get on this slippery slope.
Well, I've got a question. To that whole conversation, what about starting a conversation about some kind of like tax increment financing projects? So, all over the city there are, if the city doesn't want to pay for it, you put property into a tax district that when it's redeveloped, the tax from the redevelopment and that higher and better use and the revenue that it generates, those taxes then go to fund projects like, redoing the way the water flows through the creek, so that it, now you've got a little quote unquote river walk thing and an amenity to the properties that back up to it. If I'm not mistaken, well, I'm not gonna say that. I don't know if that's the way that Waller Creek was done or not. I feel like it is, but maybe it wasn't. But anyway, that sort of projects specifically funded by redevelopment is a very real and tool that we could use in the city of Bee Cave.
Or in the city of Rollingwood too.
Hey, y'all, I apologize. I've
Yeah,
gotta
sorry
go.
about that.
I'm officing at the Regis, at the Barton Creek complex here. We're next to the IHOP, and I only have these, I got to get out by 5 every day. So I got to jump off.
Yeah, no worries. No, I think we're probably kind of winding down a little bit as well. Yeah, the other thing I will say is I think and Jeff, I don't know how deep you've kind of dug down into this, but I think we have a tendency to look at kind of the same kind of strip of properties along the north side that I think, for better or for worse, are pretty static. And I think a lot of kind of what you said is really pretty applicable to those. And I think we forget about a lot of what's on the south side, where in my mind there is some opportunities to make some changes and hopefully encourage some things that are feasible and are doable over there. And because I've kind of taken tried to take a opportunity to go over there, drive around some of them, and that's where the bigger properties are. You have some topo issues with regard to visibility, but there's some opportunities over there too that I think we can make some changes and perhaps encourage some things that would be a benefit, but also a little bit of a catalyst also.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, my only overarching view is that, less grand strategy and kind of thoughtful suggestions and tweaks may be the better way to go, because this is all going to happen organically over time if it's going to happen. And you'd hate to think, oh, we're doing this for these reasons, and then, oh, wow, someone went a totally different direction on us, and,
Right.
and now, it's not what we envisioned, right? Because again, a developer taking risks is going to have to make it all happen, right? Or thoughtful adjustments that makes the possibilities greater, for sure, with the right constraints, right, per the values of our community.
That's right. And I mean, and some of the stuff I'm talking about, taking a look at on the north side are nothing major, because I think of the constraints and the parking and everything else like that. You're looking at, staying pretty static on your height limitations and everything else. But I think there's some things that, at least to me, are disincentives to either getting things, redevelopment that makes sense or not. And that's, impervious cover limitations, particularly on properties that are already, at 70 or 80% impervious cover with zero stormwater, water quality, stormwater controls on them. That would be brought up to Edwards Aquifer levels, which are really tight if they're redeveloped, and the setback issues. And those are kind of two kind of small ones, in terms of talking about taking a look at. And then you're right. I mean, not getting too far into the weeds about trying to dictate, what's going to be exactly what type of thing is going to be the highest and best use there. But then just kind of letting it happen more organically, because I think a lot of those properties are going to maybe be, 20, 30 years before they're redeveloped anyways, because of the economics. So. Anything else for the good of the order? Does this time work for people to meet, or is there a better time for people? Should we send around a little kind of informal poll about when people would like to meet? Why don't I do this? Why don't I work with Ashley and Tom, and we'll kind of, send around like a doodle poll or something about what would be kind of a good time for people to meet. I know some people are better during lunchtime. I know some people are better, earlier in the day, but we can, this,
I'll vote for this time. So I'll put one vote in.
okay. Yeah, this time works well for me because if we do it on kind of alternating times from the other task force, it just kind of becomes a standard weekly meeting. But we can send around and a little doodle poll or something to the members and see what works for people. And then I will also this week be looking out for kind of this property matrix. I was talking about sitting around.
Let me ask you one question. I was suggesting that one way to approach the redevelopment of the north side is to approach developers to see what they might want and would that fit. Almost not a request for bids, but interest. Because if the city were to undertake that, you're going to get a lot better idea of what the potentialities are. Right now, we're shooting in the dark. We're talking about trails, you're talking about pools for water retention. I think those are all great, but if you did it with a developer, that's going to be part of their program because they're going to want to bring those residents behind those stores down into the center, walking and driving their car conveniently, but preferred walking and bicycling, because those are people that continue walking store to store and participate in the group. I've forgotten what the word is, but there's a group thing when you have more people walking up and down, it encourages more people to walk up and down because they say, hey, something's going on. This must be interesting. So I'd like to see the city really undertake some sort of an investigation. Is there any developer would take a look at this with our income level of both our city and Westlake Hills? It says this is a kind of a hidden marketplace, and it really doesn't have the kind of stores that do $800, $700, $800 a square foot in sales tax. That's a whole different breed of cat.
I agree.
End of my statement. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and we can certainly have that discussion on, how to have those sorts of discussions, et cetera.
And Wally, that doesn't take anything but time.
But time and a business development group, possibly out of the city commission or out of working with the local chamber of commerce in Westlake, saying we are looking at, we'd like to have this thing looked at as a development. And the property owners would probably be interested in participating in some fashion. See if there's nobody out there, we're just kind of wasting our time talking about bike paths and ponds and all of that, because I can't do it by myself. And none of the other smaller stores and smaller properties are going to be wanting to, pony up a bunch of money to put in a bike path or something. We need to have a better feel for would anybody really be interested. I mean, I'm not interested in selling, but I'm interested in looking into the future. I've always been that. One thing I'm really unhappy about is I'm 85 and I no longer have a 20-year planning window. When you've worked your whole life on a 20-year planning window from the time you're 18 years old, it's really frustrating to realize I haven't got that anymore. And I'm relegated to deal with what you got. And my mind has never worked that way before.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things, I think Meredith was right when she said it. I mean, I don't think any of this stuff is a overnight, I don't think anyone thinks we're going to go build a, any sort of like, sidewalk, hike and bike trail, anything else, next year. But I mean, I think, some sort of tax increment district or things like something like that is worth considering. And I mean, and things like that get easier to do when you're dealing with larger tracts of land. And that's one thing about particularly looking at, between Edge Grove and the Palisades, is you're dealing with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 property owners on a pretty tight little strip of land.
You probably got 6.5, 7 acres.
Yeah.
Got it all together.
Yeah.
The rest of the property there will probably account for 3, and I've got 4. There's 7 or 8 acres. Might get up to 9 acres. Not a big development.
Yeah.
But it's worthwhile at 9 acres to start looking at it if you were a developer, particularly in the income level that we're in.
And if word gets around, it seems to me, and I don't know, but if word gets around that the city of Rollingwood is looking for that kind of development, that the city would encourage it, that the community would be behind it, then you've got a lot more, a developer would have more incentive to take a hard look at it than there is right now.
Actually, you had one city commission member 3, 4, 5 years ago that was partners with the people that came and made me an offer on the Palisades wanting to put together something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think that's right. I think there's going to be development interest. It seems like everyone I know who's in the real estate development game right now, all they want to talk about is building and developing high-tech campuses. That's the new demand right now. Everyone's a high-tech.
Hot one right now.
That's a hot one, man.
Mm-hmm.
So where can we go build a tech campus? So. All right. Well, unless there's anything else, I think we should probably adjourn and be looking for some stuff to come around this week.
Okay. Thank you, David.
All right. Thank you all.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.